Hello and welcome to the Intel Brief. I'm your host Daniel, and firstly, I just wanted to say sorry for there being no podcast recently. I was away on holiday, just having a wee long weekend over in Europe. So I thought we'd do this bit of a quick Sunday update brief just because so much has happened. And today we're going to cover off the US has increased airstrikes to swiftly punish Iran following the tragic death of a couple of servicemen in Jordan. Zelensky has ousted his defense minister, which has sparked protests in Kyiv, and Ukrainian drones have sunk Russian ships in the Black Sea. So firstly, the US has launched a new round of airstrikes to swiftly punish Iran after American troops were killed in Jordan. The US launched a fourth consecutive night of strikes on Iran and reinstated its naval blockade of Iranian ports on the 14th of July. A US aircraft disabled a non-compliant tanker with a Hellfire missile near Karg Island, and Iran retaliated with missile and drone attacks on US infrastructure in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, the last of which resulted in at least 2 US KIA a few days ago. So what? I think the war has gone back to a pretty high tempo here, with the US KIA definitely increasing the tensions around the situation. I think it's almost certain / highly likely at this point that the ceasefire is dead, right? We're just clearly going back to a conflict. However, I don't think the US really has a plan on how they're going to finish this. I think they still want the ceasefire to work. However, Iran has made it pretty clear that, they want to keep control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is something the US just can't tolerate. Thereby making any form of negotiation basically impossible. And also, millions of barrels a day of oil are currently offline, with the oil market squeeze likely to deepen over the coming weeks and months. The fuel situation globally was already pretty bad, and the renewed conflict is only going to hurt that further. And next, President Zelensky has dismissed the defense minister, who was widely seen as highly effective and triggered nationwide protests on the 16th of July. He then appointed a former SBU senior deputy as acting head the following day. The SBU, for those who don't know, is Ukrainian intelligence. The reshuffle has come while Ukraine is pressing its deep strike capabilities pretty hard inside Russia, and they have been quite effective. So, it's an interesting time to do it. So what? This replacement of a tech modernizer with career intelligence officer is signaling a shift in, I think, how Kyiv wants to run this war. Some critics have seen it as a return to like a Soviet era kind of doctrine and moving away from the high tech, quite modernizing way that Ukraine has been fighting their war. I hope this is incorrect because the way Ukraine has been fighting the war, in my opinion, is their best path to victory, especially these long strikes and the story we'll talk about next, which is striking Russia's naval fleet and other ships. And the domestic unrest at this stage is a pretty genuine wartime vulnerability. Critics both in the West and, anti-Ukrainians in Russia are going to point at this as just kind of proof that the government has no control or no way of running the country. Sorry, I'm stuck for the words here. But they're just going to use it against the Ukrainian government to say that the people, want Zelensky gone. This is something that Russia has already talked about, that Zelensky is an illegitimate leader and that he needs to hold elections. This was a kind of story that, pro-Russians in the West, particularly in the US, got hold of and really started to try and push. And it almost looked like Trump was going to start reiterating the same things. And I think the move raises real questions about the political control over Ukraine's defense apparatus. In my opinion, wartime commanders should be left to command the war. That is what they do and how they do it without politics getting into it. But the reality is politics are a huge part of the current conflict in Ukraine. So it's pretty difficult to do. So, hopefully it works out and I hope this is a good choice. But yeah, it's kind of showing the struggles within the senior leaderships of the Ukrainian military and government. And lastly, kind of the opposite and a bit of more positive spin, Ukrainians' naval drones have sunk a Russian patrol ship near a compound reportedly linked to Putin. And Kyiv has also struck 116 Russian vessels in 9 days, alongside an Su-24 bomber in occupied Crimea, and also numerous refineries hit deep inside Russia. Also, the Wildberry strike yesterday, which sent massive plumes of smoke over Moscow, was also highly effective. Moscow has accused Ukraine of terrorism over the shipping campaign and also all of its drone campaigns, claiming that they continue to target civilian infrastructure, which I disagree with. I think Ukraine is just being highly effective at this point, and Russia is not happy. So what? Unmanned systems are reshaping how the Black Sea is getting controlled faster than Russia can adapt. They are hitting so many ships at this point that Russia doesn't really have a way of stopping them. There's especially naval drones seem to be extremely difficult to stop. They're low, like they're sleek, they're dark, pretty hard to see in the ocean, and they come at them pretty quickly. With the best way of stopping them, shooting them, which is pretty difficult. And the strike tempo, 116 vessels in 9 days, is a pretty high rate, and it marks, in my opinion, a new phase of this drone war. Ukraine has spent a long time targeting the refinery infrastructure when it comes to fuel, and now they're disrupting the way they're moving the fuel around. Another very hard thing to replace, especially in this day and age with so many sanctions against Russia. And I think this template is highly likely to be studied by other navies worldwide. Ukraine has no real naval capacity at this point. They can't put ships to sea. Yet they are absolutely hammering Russia's naval infrastructure, both military and merchant fleets. So, it's a pretty crazy doctrine that I think will be studied going forward. But anyway, that's been this weekend update. I hope you're all well, and I'll see you again tomorrow. See you!